Welcome to the latest episode with the Informing Choices mini-pod. On this podcast, we've considered not only technological, geopolitical, social, and environmental issues impacting the future of life, society, and business, but also some of the essential evolving leadership capabilities. Developing new and different perspectives on how we enable a smooth transition into our rapidly changing reality is just as important as considering the trends and weak signals we observe in our foresight. In this episode of the Informing Choices mini pod, we will consider one of these enabling capabilities and explore emotion in organisational change. To do this, I'm delighted to welcome change expert and author Jennifer Bryan back to the pod. Jennifer, a warm welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's fantastic to be here. I really enjoy helping business leaders, particularly those who aren't change professionals, really understand the driving force of emotion and change without making it overcomplicated, as you well know.
Yeah. So I mean, we're going to base this obviously on your new book, The Emotional Side of Organizational Change: How to Survive and Thrive. So, why was it important for you to focus on that specifically?
It was really important because change evokes emotion, the good, the bad, the ugly, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, or otherwise, it doesn't matter. It evokes emotion. And yet we hardly ever talk about emotion
Hmm.
in business, period.
Yes.
And when we do, we or see emotion, we tend to shy away from it. Whether people are laughing, we're like, oh gosh, what's that going on over there? Or crying or shouting, whatever it may be. On top of that, when it comes to change, the only model or framework or help anyone has when it comes to dealing with emotion is the Kubler-Ross curve. Now, the Kubler-Ross curve is great, but that was created in 1962.
Hmm.
And the thing is, the world is very different now than it was in 1962. And on top of that, it wasn't even created for change. It was actually created for in grief. And so that again is a very different thing than what actually is going to help leaders and managers look at emotion and understand it and help people as a result through change. So therefore I felt this was something that was really making leaders find change difficult because they didn't know what to do, how to deal with it, and quite frankly, would rather not touch it with a 10-foot barge pole.
So it seems to me that if we quite often with change, I guess there's a significant focus on things like process, on things like systems. But knowing you for some time now, one of the things you're very keen to do is kind of humanize change, isn't it? So is that part of the rebalancing of change, if you like, to humanize change?
Yes, most definitely. I mean, I've been focused on humanizing change my entire career in change, so for well over 25 years, which is a very different take. And what I find quite humorous is in the change community, a lot of people the last couple of years have been talking about how managing change is changing and it's much more human and it's more about coaching and so forth. I'm going, that's what I've been doing for 25 years. What do you want about? That's not different. It's where I come from, and I recognize that that is a very unique approach. And I think that unique approach really stems from my fascination of people from the get-go and coming from a theatrical background. One of my favorite pastimes was to sit in a cafe or sit in a bar or sit in a restaurant, wherever it may be, and watch people and try and create their stories for them, whether on the subway, on the tubes, whatever it may be, and do that. We didn't have phones then and hence didn't have our heads down and doom scroll. But at the same time, I think that's something we need to continue doing so that we can be more compassionate about each other, because that's what's going to really help us with the acceleration and the continuation and the constant, uh, real drivers of change that we are inundated with on a daily basis.
So, given this kind of escalating pace and scale of change that you just alluded to across
Mm.
multiple, arguably across all sectors, what emotional competencies do you believe will differentiate organizations that remain adaptive from those that fall behind, fall by the wayside because they don't get it?
I think one of the key skills, I wouldn't say necessarily for organizations, but for because organizations by definition is a group of people.
Yep.
And so I would say the skill set that people need and leaders and managers and actually staff, everyone, is compassion for others. And it's about not just tolerating difference, but trying to understand what makes people tick and the difference of that. And that goes beyond the uh, psychoanalysis of introvert and extrovert. It's about saying, well, what's going on there? What's driving that? To really, because that will really help from a psychological safety perspective and will catapult organizations. And an example I can give, and Steve, you might remember this when in other scenarios I've shared before. I was working with a very large organization of 90,000 people across the UK on a digital transformation program. And when I first started, they were quite literally the program team about to pilot the transformation and the training that went along with it because it was new devices as well as new programs and so forth the next week. And they said, oh, and I said that's very fast. I said, oh, well, these people are very technically savvy and they can point us in the direction as to how others are going to react because we know there's a fear of technology in the organization. So that way we can see what we need to do and how we need to do it and so forth. I went, oh, okay. I still think it's a bit soon, but fine. I can understand that logic. Can I come along and watch? And they said, yes, of course. So I went to watch and literally be a fly on the wall. And what I noticed was people were very animated as they were coming into the room. But then, as soon as they uh, saw the devices and saw what was in the room, they immediately, first of all, became silent. And their walk and animation suddenly just slowed down to a glacial pace, and they very slowly walked to the stations to sit down. And they, quite frankly, were scared to press the on button of these new devices. And that's when I realized there's not a fear of technology here. There is a phobia. But I wouldn't know that and recognize that if I hadn't stopped and looked at people and start to try and understand how they're reacting and behaving. It was through then further analysis of questioning that I found out that the reason why they were behaving in that way was because these individuals in a large portion of the organization had to deal with the public when they weren't at their best time
Right.
in life. And as a result, there were individuals, and it wasn't unusual, where they would have a code, and I don't know what the code is. You know, I don't know if it's a star or a triangle or a color or a dot or whatever it may be, but they had a code on people's files that alerted the person who was then dealing, the caseworker who was dealing with that member of the public, whether they'd been violent before
Right.
and just how violent they had been or aggressive or whatever it may be. Because, and that's what they were afraid of is if they were in front of somebody who had been violent before, picked up a chair, thrown it against the glass and shattered it or whatever it may
Yeah.
be, that if they pressed the wrong button accidentally, unlike someone like you and me who in a normal day, or even anybody in a normal situation would go, oh, don't worry. Oh, sorry about that. I just need to click back. And we go, oh, yeah, sure, of course. And they click back. A person who is in that hyper emotionally triggered state would not be rational
Right.
and would not um, be understanding of the caseworker. And so the caseworker was reacting in that way, that phobia way, out of fear for their safety. And so it wasn't until understood that then we could put actions and plans in place to actually combat that. So that's why these skills are really extremely important for organizations and its people to take on board. And that will be the difference as to whether, in my opinion, an organization is going to succeed or or fail and just become an autonomous robot.
Yeah. It sounds to me if one of the things that you were talking about there was an ability to understand the connectivity between lots of different emotional states, emotional responses to something that's being almost forced on people, and understanding of those things might have changed the way that the device in this case was introduced in the first place.
Well, that's exactly it. So it's about understanding the the context in which
Yeah,
people are coming in.
yeah,
It's a load of people when they're looking at change or a transformation and they're planning transformation, they think about, as you've rightly said, the processes, the systems, the comms plans, the training plans, but they're not looking at any of that in the context in which people are actually present
yeah,
in that change. If there is an energy crisis going on or a war going on or whatever it may be, that has an impact on how confident and secure people feel. Whether it's happening to them directly or not to them directly, it still has an impact. And that level of confidence and level of security has a huge impact as to how responsive we are going to be with change. So if we don't take those things into account as an organization and as leaders and managers, then that's when we will end up in a situation where we will have extraordinarily low adoption rates because we're brilliant, resilient beings as people,
yeah.
which is why we've managed to live as long as we do. And so we'll come up with our own little workarounds if we can.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. One of the things I guess that we can see all around us is kind of changing work models. So, in what ways do you think emerging work models, like remote, hybrid, distributed, gig, change the emotional dynamics of change, particularly around culture and employee well-being?
I think it's again going back to that level of compassion. So
Hmm.
the the thing is, I've been working, full disclosure, I've been working in a hybrid way for at least 15 years, and elements of that even longer. And so for me, it feels I feel very comfortable with it. But I'm also recognize I'm in quite a privileged position where I've got my own space,
Yeah,
my own room to do my work, and hence it makes it very easy to do. That's not the case for everybody. Also, it's not conducive for all work either. And even
true.
in my work, there are times it's much, much better if I'm not doing it remotely, if I'm doing it
Yes.
face in person. Workshops are so much more dynamic if you can do it in person.
Yeah.
Focus groups and things like that. It's not to say you can't do them remotely, because obviously we can, but it's just the dynamic differences. But what we need to really understand is those differences. And as leaders, we are having to deal with areas that we've not actually really had to think about before. Now, maybe we should have, but we didn't.
Yeah.
And those being loneliness, a sense of belonging, and also the circumstances, the home circumstances of which people are at. I had to, for example, take that into account when I brought on board a graduate a few years ago with a project. I needed some help, and I decided I needed to hire a graduate, which I did. And she was incredible. But I told her, I said, look, no one's here on a Friday. It's a ghost town. I won't be here on a Friday. This was before the pandemic. I said, so you don't need to come in on Friday if you don't want to. Obviously, you can if you want, but don't feel you need to, as it's, an hour's commute or near about for her. I said, you don't worry about it. So the first Friday, she was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize you're right. Because of course she did go in. And bless her heart. And she was more or less in this very big office on her own. And she did that a couple times, and she was really struggling with that. And I said, why are you coming in? No one's there, and I'm not going to be there. And I said, you can, cut the commute and just take it easy on the Friday, in regards to the commute side of things. And it turns out she was in a bed sit. And so the only place she could work was in her bedroom on her bed, which wasn't really
Yeah.
comfortable for her to work and be in a work mode. And it wasn't then I went, oh gosh, of course, of course. And so I went, well, where? And then I had to find out. So where do you live? And I did a little research and I went, you know what? Actually, we've got an office not far from where you live. Why don't you try going there instead? So at least you're only having to do a 15-minute walk rather than an hour's train ride. And so that's what she did, and it worked brilliantly. But had I not gone out and gotten that context and understood
Yeah.
her situation, and then not just taken that from an empathy arena, but then acted on it, which is the difference with compassion,
Yeah.
that that made a major difference to the performance and the safety and the security and confidence and someone feeling valued because they feel they're being someone cares about them. And that's huge.
That sounds like one of these other kind of conflicts almost between uh, being more human, exhibiting compassion, and an increasingly digitized world. So it's something we have to work harder to do, isn't it?
I think we need to be more conscious about it. I
Hmm.
think we used to do it. I would argue not always in business, we could be a bit harsh about it, but I think we were better at it. Now we've gotten lazy with it. Because we get easily distracted by our little electronic devices and
That's true.
phones and things, and we all we have to do is look at the younger generation. Even babies and kids are sitting in restaurants and on a tablet or on a
Yeah.
phone
Yeah.
while the parents eat and they're being spoon fed. And I always call it the guppy arena, where they just open their mouth and the food just magically is shoved into their mouth, and then they don't even know what's going on because they're so engrossed with what they're watching, on that front. Whereas, so we're teaching ourselves even to be very passive
Yeah.
about each other and lives. So for me, it's not so much, I think, harder. It's about we need to be more intentional and stop being so lazy
Yeah.
about it.
Brilliant. Um, let's just end with this question then. What are the practical methods that leaders in organization um, can use to interpret and respond to emotional signals during periods of during periods of organizational change? Things like automation-led redesign or large-scale workforce reorganization. So, what are the practical methods that leaders can use?
Get people curious. Go and literally be people curious. That is the most practical, easy thing for people, for leaders and managers to do when it comes to organizations in regards to any sort of transformation or redesign or anything that's going on. And I would say even in BAU situations. However, let's face it, is there any kind of BAU at the moment? Not sure. But to put into the mindset, even if you are or feel you are in a BAU situation, business as usual, you need to be people curious. Go and don't doom scroll. Don't take your phone down to the organization's cafe. Have that cup of coffee and just sit down and look at people. What's going on for them? How are they walking in? Do they have their heads down? Do they look shattered? Are they happy? Do they have smiles on their face? Do they just have a blank face of going, I'm just going to get through this and then I'm going to go home and whatever it may be. Try and look and see what's going on around you. Also, when you're walking around the office, going to a meeting room, instead of being again on our devices going, oh, which meeting room? Look at that beforehand so that when you're walking down the aisles of the office and the halls of the office, look and see how people are working. Do they just have their heads down on the screens and not interacting with anybody? Is there some chatter going on? Is there some laughter at the coffee station? Are people interact? What is happening? So get people curious. That is the biggest, easiest thing anybody can do. And that will actually make a huge difference in how you are able to understand what's going on for people with the context in which they're at, how people are feeling, what they might be thinking, and hence under, start to understand the impact of whatever it is that you're going to do might have on them.
So really pay attention to what you notice about the human within the workforce, perhaps. Uh,
Exactly.
Jennifer, that's been absolutely brilliant. There's a link to your new book in the podcast description. So if you're interested in
Brilliant.
this topic, do go there. It's going to be brilliant. I know it is. Jennifer, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you very much, Steve. It was really a fantastic pleasure to share personal stories and professional stories and really help people on this transformation without making it overcomplicated.
And thank you everyone for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new episodes of the Informing Choices mini pod. And do let your friends and colleagues know all about the podcast. There'll be another one along very soon.